I just appreciate so much that it looks so different to anything else on the road. It has real theatre to it, kind of like a supercar, honestly.
Look, I get it. These are a cool, fun, quirky French car. Fun fact, the engine is actually from Nissan, which is probably actually a good thing.
I think this thing has its kind of own cool, unique sounds to it with all the turbo whooshes and noises. It actually sort of sounds a bit McLaren-y. Okay, look, we're sure you've seen and heard all of the accolades these things receive. The Alpine A110 is being celebrated as one of the all-time great performance cars. But it is French. And look, we don't want to perpetuate any stereotypes, but often French cars can be accused of being quirky. Sometimes they can have some interesting build quality issues. Some say reliability isn't exactly a strength. So as wonderful as an A110 might be to drive, is buying a used one actually something you should ever seriously consider? I mean, what does ownership actually look like for these? Firstly, one of the big priorities with the development of this car was to make it as light as possible. And it tips the scales at around 1,100 kilos. Now, to put that into perspective, that's lighter than a Ford Fiesta. And look, this is awesome for so many reasons, because a lighter car generally means better performance. Plus, it's also lighter on its consumables, like the tyres and the brakes and even fuel consumption. But the problem is, to achieve this lightweight at this kind of budget, some compromises have had to be made, especially in the cabin. For example, there is a lot of plastic in here, and some of it, like down here and on the doors, it can feel a bit cheap and nasty. Even some of the switchgear just doesn't feel that special at all. Although the things that you touch when you're driving, like the steering wheel here and the paddles and even the pedals, they do feel fantastic. These paddles, they're metal and they just feel even just lovely to use. But then the problem with some of these cheap plastics is that owners have reported just rattles and squeaks can kind of pop up all over the place. Not in this car, this one sounds as tight as a drum. But then the other problem is when you sort of fix one rattle, another one appears somewhere else. So you're kind of just constantly chasing your rattly tail. Now this could also allude to, let's say, some interesting build quality features. This center console, for example, it is attached to the car, but not in any kind of secure way at all. And if you owners have complained that some of the leather or the Alcantara on these absolutely exquisite Sebelt seats, it can get a little bit loose over time. And the hinges for the doors, they are known to get a little bit creaky. Even in this one, when we first picked it up, it was a little bit creaky, but now, no, it's fine. And some owners have reported that the window seals can peel away a little. And on some of the early models, the seals around the boot could leak as well. But good news here, chances are all of these issues would have been fixed under warranty. And let's be honest, they're only kind of small discrepancies anyway. Plus, if you're looking at buying a very niche, low volume sports car, some of these little quirks are to be expected. Although one thing that can be bloody annoying is that the engine has to be on for the windows to go up and down. Or if you have just turned the engine off and you haven't opened the door yet, you can put the windows up and down as long as the electronics in the car are still running. That takes a couple of minutes, maybe 1 minute. But after that, even if you've just turned accessories on, the windows won't go up and down again until you start the car all over again. But here's the issue, right? Let's say the car breaks down due to, I don't know, a fuel pump failure, which can be a thing, and you were driving around with the windows down before this happened. It means you can't put the windows back up. But if it then starts raining, well, you're kind of stuffed, which is exactly what happened to the original owner of this car. They had this problem, although luckily there was no serious damage done. But just talk about a flawed system. Actually, the same can be said for the infotainment systems. And look, this is something we see time and time again across so many cars, and it's all the usual complaints. You've got, screens locking up or turning black or just really slow operation, or there's connection issues like Apple CarPlay and Android Auto and Bluetooth just dropping out. Actually, on the early cars, they didn't come with Apple CarPlay or Android Auto, but to add that in terms of retrofitting it, super simple, just a little software update. Or to fix these infotainment issues, you could just do what Leon that owns this car has done and ditch the factory one and fit a quality aftermarket unit. And this thing's actually really, really good. It also helps because even when the factory systems are at their best, they're honestly not that great. They're not very intuitive. They feel sort of a generation old. Also, the sound systems in here, they're also not that fantastic. But let's be honest, a car like this, it's not about the quality of the stereo or the infotainment tech. It's about how it drives. Which is interesting because there are actually a couple of annoyances when it comes to driving. For example, when it's sunny, which, let's be honest, it is most of the time in Australia, The reflection of the dash off the windscreen is like it's a huge head-up display, and it can get pretty bloody annoying. As can some of the DSG operations. Like so many dual clutch transmissions out there at slow speeds, it can just be a bit grumpy on shifts. But apparently this has been sorted somewhat with some more recent updates. And also, when you're up to speed and kind of firing through the gears, it's a really good gearbox for a DSG. And look, yes, I agree with you that it's a massive shame these were never offered with the manual transmission. But according to those in the know, that would have just been far too expensive to develop. And honestly, if you had to choose between an A110 with a DSG or no A110 at all, I'm sure we can all agree we'd rather the car exists in the first place. And anyway, this shares its powertrain with the Megane RS. And I drove the manual version of that when it first came out as a press car. And I'll be honest with you, the manual in it, it's actually not that impressive to drive. So yeah, the DSG is a bit of a compromise. But as far as compromises go, it's a pretty good one. Although, I do like that the shifters are attached to the steering column and not the steering wheel, but I just wish the actual paddle itself reached a little bit further down, because I'm finding when going through corners, you have to take your hand off the wheel to change gears. It's only a small problem, but something more serious that has concerned quite a few owners is that some of the paint around the rear wheel arches can bubble, and it can be due to some corrosion or oxidization between basically where this guard meets the rear bar. And now look, for most of these cars, this has been sorted under warranty, but just know that warranty isn't going to last forever. Actually, depending on what market you're in, who knows how long Alpine as a brand will last? Will they be around forever? Who really knows? But look, just check around this whole area thoroughly before you buy. Actually, also on the topic of Alpine, do your homework on the dealers. Chances are they're going to be great, right? But then there are owners that have complained of long delays in the dealership just getting back to them, or poor care taken while the car is with them, through to long delays in just getting certain spare parts. And being a European car, you can expect that certain parts are going to ask a premium. Even simple consumables like the wiper blades, the price of the OEM ones can be ridiculous. Don't fall for the trap of paying too much for OEM wiper blades. Instead, get yourself a set of Wipertech blades by hitting the link below. You're going to get 15% off and free express shipping, and they are the only wiper blades we use because they are simply some of the best in the business. But also on the car, just make sure that anything powered by electricity actually works as it should. Chances are it will, but there are a few sporadic complaints of the parking sensors and the rear view camera playing up, and the aircon controls and the door locks and the power windows. They're all, there are reports of these things having little freakouts now and again. But the thing is, chances are any of these electronic issues, they're just down to some, let's say, some battery drainage issues, or maybe some battery health issues. And look, that's most likely because most A110s out there, they're not used as people's daily drivers. They're used on the occasional weekend. But the problem is, if the car's just left to sit, well, then the battery drains, and that's why you end up with these kind of weird electronic gremlins. Now, the hot tip here is just to get yourself a really quality trickle charger. We use one from M81 and we're wrapped with it. If you want one of those, make sure you get it from our mates at Automotive Superstore. Actually, you know what? They carry hundreds of thousands of different parts and accessories. So chances are, no matter what you want, they're gonna have it. Their link is down below, and they're mates of ours. Check them out. Now, about the only other complaint we came across with this interior was just the complete lack of storage and practicality in here for all your crap. But remember, it is supposed to be a sports car. This was never intended to be sort of a people mover or a practical car in any way. But what do you have in terms of storage? You've got a spot here, which I suppose is sort of for your phone. That can go just there, or the funky sort of key. You've got storage under here with some USB ports. There's no glove box of any sort. There's no door bins, but you can get these optional Alpine little pockets. They're pretty cool down there. Now, you've got a cup holder, a single cup holder. I think in French it's cup holder, but you can buy these fancy double cup holder kind of accessory things to expand that a little bit. There's a tiny bit of storage back here. I have no idea what that's for. And there's some nets behind the fabulous seats. Oh, also, we just found this cup holder under the seat here. This is actually for air-cooled 911s, but it fits the A110 perfectly. That's genius. But look, yeah, overall for practicality, nothing special. And the boot is tiny. It's actually more like the car has a pocket. Hot tip as well, literally, for both this boot and the front, don't go storing any ice cream in there because it can get bloody warm bloody quickly. Actually, speaking of the front, look, this thing has about enough space for a dirty weekend away. But look, positives, at least it has more cargo area than, say, a Lotus Elise or an Alfa Romeo 4C or a 1990s Toyota MR2. But if you do want to go away for more than a weekend, well, you might need to look at an Emira or maybe a Cayman. But look, while we're in this vicinity of the car, let's talk about the looks. What do you think? We know it's a polarizing car in terms of design. Personally, I bloody love how these look. And not because it's the last word in perfect automotive design, I just appreciate so much that it looks so different to anything else on the road. Plus, they have absolutely nailed the whole homage to the original A110 from the 1960s and 70s. Also, if you haven't seen one of these in the flesh, which if you're watching this from North America, chances are you haven't, it's quite small. In fact, it takes up pretty much the same footprint as the ND Mazda MX-5 or Miata and old school air-cooled 911s. So it's the perfect proportions. Basically, it's small, but that's a really good thing. But it doesn't feel small inside at all. Fun fact, when this was being developed, one of the head honchos was 200 centimeters tall. I'm around 12 centimeters shorter than he is. And you can tell he wanted a car that he could fit in, because in here, like, I've actually got the seat forward a bit. It actually goes further back to the point, like, I can reach the steering wheel, but that's not comfortable. But then, even in my seating position, I've still got loads of headroom. That's good because it means I can fit a helmet on for a track day. The seating position is just absolutely perfect. And also the overall vibe in here, it has real theatre to it, kind of like a supercar. Honestly, it's not like an Elise or an Exige where it's completely stripped out like a racing car, but then I feel like a Cayman or even an Emira, they're almost a bit too luxurious. This is this sort of perfect balance in between. I love the color-coded panels here, the kind of slight carbon fiber look here, and these seats. Even if you don't get to drive one of these, just have a sit in the seats. There's a few different seats available and they're all comfortable in their own way, but these, like, about as perfect as it gets. But if you do want to step the kind of interior vibe and accoutrement up a few notches, well, depending on where you're watching this from, there have been spicier variants available. In Australia, we have had 4 variants, but internationally, there have been a host of models, including the track-focused R with its extra aero, carbon fiber wheels and aggressive chassis setup. And if you're a Formula One fan, maybe the Enstone edition or the ultra-limited Fernando Alonso model might ripple your strip. Now look, in the research for this video, I watched far too many hours of Chris Harris and Henry Catchpole and the boys from Throttle House and Matt Watson and pretty much every automotive YouTuber driving one of these things to its limits on the track or belting it down some picturesque mountain road, raving about how it's easily one of the all-time great performance cars, regardless of the price. Even Jason Comissa with Haggerty did such a phenomenal deep dive on the history of these and why they're so special, and I highly recommend watching all of those videos. But you know what none of these absolute legends discussed? What these are like to drive in the real world. See, the vast majority of the time, you're going to be dealing with traffic. You're going to be trying to find a park or having to dodge potholes when you're driving to and from work, or maybe a track day, or maybe your favorite driving road. So rather than just repeating what everyone else has already said countless times before, let's get way more realistic. This thing takes everything that makes a Mazda MX-5 so special, which is lightweight and small size, but then mixes in just the perfect amount of supercar theatrics. Firstly, because it's so light, it can have softer suspension than what you're anticipating, so it just soaks up potholes and joins in the roads and just shitty surfaces, and it doesn't bounce all over the place like riding an old BMX bike down a set of stairs like so many other modern performance cars can. And then the steering, it has so much feel and feedback all the time, so it makes working out your trajectory into a driveway or hammering through a roundabout just so enjoyable. And then, because it's just so small, it's easy to park. You don't stress when you're driving down a narrow street and see a dual cab ute coming the other way. Even nipping into gaps in traffic, it's just a breeze. And then because it's a turbocharged engine, it has a great amount of torque down low. So when you're pulling into traffic or trying to merge, you don't have to rev the thing to the red line and become antisocial with a screaming engine. It just it gets there with so much torque. And look, okay, that means it misses out on some of the supercar oral experience, but I think this thing has its kind of own cool, unique sounds to it with all the turbo whooshes and noises. It actually sort of sounds a bit McLaren-y. And then when you do get the opportunity to give it the beans, because it's so lightweight, the power to weight ratio is awesome. This thing can do 0 to 100 in the low 4-second region. That's kind of the same as a Lamborghini Gallardo. This is a properly quick car. And because the transmission's a DSG, being stuck in traffic doesn't instantly turn into a leg day for your left leg on the clutch. And then, because it looks so unique, but not in sort of like an overt or an aggressive way, like say a Ferrari or a Lamborghini, the response from everyone out there is so positive. And look, I've said this before, and okay, maybe it's a uniquely Australian thing, but driving a supercar around in Australia can really attract a lot of negative attention. But in this, I've just found I'm getting thumbs up all the time. A guy clapped before. All the response to this car is just, as I said, so positive. And also, between you and I, supercars at normal speeds, honestly, aren't that fun. You kind of don't really see what the point of them is until you're over 200 k's an hour. In this, I've maybe hit 80 k an hour a couple of times in it, and I have had so much fun every second of driving it. It's so special. Or at least it is until something mechanically goes wrong. What's the story there? Well, I can't tell you because I'm not a qualified mechanic. But you know who is? It's Jim.
Now, sales-wise, look, there are not that many of these cars. So the engine being the same as the Renault Megane, a lot of these reliability stats come from the Renault. Oil consumption, premature turbo wear, and premature timing chain complications are probably the most common complaints. Now, all three of those have got something to do with the servicing, and I'll get to that in a minute. One of the common issues you will see with the cooling system is there is a pipe that joins from the engine to the main pipe that runs right under the car. It's got a bunch of outlets on it. It is very much prone to leaking, and it's eye-wateringly expensive. Another coolant leak you're likely to see is from the electronic thermostat, which is on the back end of the head. Now, a fun fact, this thermostat from Renault is about $1,700. God only knows what that costs when it comes in an Alpine box. Now, the fuel pump module in these is a very common problem. Now, fun fact, it's virtually the same as the fuel pump module in the RS Megane. Now, to buy one of those from Renault is about $2,200-ish, but I can absolutely guarantee you can take that fuel pump module out, you can pull it apart, and you can put in an aftermarket pump in there and save probably about $1,500. Now, some of these had a recall to do with an oil pressure solenoid. Now, it's highly advisable you get that done because it can cause engine damage. In fact, just make sure all of the recalls are up to date. Now, these things spec a 020 oil. Now, in a hot climate like Australia, that's actually a terrible idea. I would recommend a 530 oil, a good quality synthetic oil, obviously, and ignore the 20,000 kilometre service intervals. Look, you really should be doing this every 10,000 kilometres if you want it to last. Now, the transmissions in these, they are actually fairly reliable, although in this application, it's at its maximum torque capability, so tune at your own risk. The transmissions are prone to overheating, especially on a track day, so you need to keep an eye on that. And if you are going to track it, my tip here is service the thing every 20,000 Ks. Something to consider with these is, look, in Australia, there are only about 100 of them ever sold. In fact, out of the 20,000 units of these sold, 60% of those were in France. So what does that mean for ongoing service and parts availability? Look, we don't really know.
Now, being a French car in Australia, you're probably thinking we're going to start talking about the insane levels of depreciation these things are likely going to suffer from, right? That might not be the case. See, pricing on the used market currently hovers between about $90,000 to $130,000, which is pretty much what they were asking when they were brand new. And even internationally, like, okay, used prices did take a little bit of a dip initially, but they seem to be on the rise. And that's what happens when there is more demand than supply. And those financial trends might continue because as of 2026, production will stop. And we doubt its replacement, actually, even if it has a replacement, will be anything like this. Actually, even right now, there's nothing else really like this. A Lotus Elise or Exige lack the A110's creature comforts, but at the other end of the spectrum, a Cayman or a TTRS or an Emira lack some of the Alpine's rawness. And anything else that boasts a mid-engine layout, supercar style looks, and the A110's levels of driving enjoyment generally cost tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars more. Look, basically, if you have the means and you want a car that's going to have you falling for its charms every single time you get behind the wheel, get one of these. Or if you want something that will do that but is a bit different, maybe get one of these. Although in saying get one of these. Or maybe something a bit different, maybe one of these. So that way, isn't it?